Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's conversation is one every divorcing parent needs to hear before they make a single emotional decision that could cost them years of peace, thousands of dollars, and sometimes even their relationship with their family and children. So today's guest is Jason Wright. He's an award-winning Austin, Texas family law attorney. So grab your notebook, especially if you live in Texas. But we will also be talking about other topics in family court that maybe don't have anything to do with Texas specifically. So tune in. He's the founder of the law office of Jason Wright, easy to remember, and a man known for telling the truth plainly, even when it's uncomfortable. You know, Jason and I are going to get along just fine. Jason focuses on complex divorce, custody disputes, and property division, helping families understand not what they wish the law said, but how family court actually works. So, Jason, thanks for coming on the Better Divorce podcast today. I'm really glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, a lot of times people always ask me about working with attorneys, and I always have to remind people, I've never played an attorney on TV. I don't pretend to be an attorney. I have a lot of relationships with attorneys. I hang out with a lot of attorneys. I have a lot of, friends that are attorneys. But I've never pretended I was an attorney, nor would I want to.
Yeah, that's good.
I find it to be an exhausting career. Kudos to you. I think the work I do is, has its moments too, but I do have a lot of respect for the profession, and particularly in family law, it's not an easy profession. So tell everybody, why would you possibly want to be a family law attorney? Whatever made you be that, I don't want to say college kid or high school kid that said this is the avenue or the line of work you wanted to pursue?
Well, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't that simple. My path to getting here was not linear, and so
It usually isn't, so that's okay.
Yeah.
Neither was mine.
Yeah, I certainly didn't have as volatile of a family law situation that you experienced, but my path. I went through a divorce, and that put me on a different path in life. I was later in life. I was 30, 32, and kind of wandering around, what was I going to do, what was I not going to do. It occurred to me that I would be good at being an attorney. I think that throughout my life that people had said certain things that you'd be good at, not knowing what that meant, right? But also coming to a point in my life where realizing that I could either be 30. I think I graduated at 37. I could either be 37 with a law degree or without, and I kind of made that decision to go do that. In my particular case, I remember. It was not, we didn't go to trial, it wasn't volatile, we didn't have children, it wasn't this huge event, but it was a huge life event for me. I mean, it was not a pleasant experience, it was a traumatic event in my life, but I remember going through it and realizing that none of the lawyers, the mediators, no one in that case had been through that, and not that that's a requirement, that would be a weird requirement to have to do that before you become a family law attorney, but it gave me a perspective that I felt like I could share and benefit my clients from, and I think I have done that. I think that in my career and what I do, I at least am able. What I would say is I have boundaries, right? So even though we deal with very heavy stuff, and I deal with people who are fighting about the most personal things they could fight about, their children and their money, and sometimes it does get difficult. There are difficult days, and sometimes there's really difficult days. But at the end of the day, I'm able to shut down. Compartmentalize and go home and see my family and try not to carry that all with me throughout the night and the weekends and all that stuff.
Well, that really matters because I do find that if you, I don't mean you personally, but anyone who's always commingling their work life and family life, and you don't have any of that sort of, shall we say, boundary, it can get really stressful. And the burnout rate and even the illness rate I know of this type of career can be stressful. So
Absolutely.
I'm proud of you for being able to do that, and helping people through the tough times. I mean, you mentioned my experience. It was not pretty. It was not fun. It was long and expensive and contentious. And there was a 12-day trial that took place over 9 months and a 4-year appeals court process. I never dreamed 8.5 years of my life would be monopolized by the legal judicial system. But it taught me the tools and knowledge wisdom, shall we say, that I can help people through the emotional side of it too. Never mind sort of getting them the right professionals they may or may not need. Sometimes you have to interview people just to see if you need them or not. So there's a lot to take into consideration, and thank you for having the insight of that. I did go through a rather unique situation. Not everybody does that, and don't panic, everyone. If you hear my 8.5 years, it doesn't mean you're probably going into that. In fact, it's highly unlikely. But because too many people are kind of walking in this divorce world armed with either Google, ChatGPT, Claude, TikTok, legal advice, not making fun of any of those, it is what it is, or kind of a rage-filled Facebook group, which I see a lot of. In fact, a lot of people mention my names in most of them, and Google searches that fuel fear instead of wisdom. I did want to kind of start with that. There is information is knowledge, information is power, but where you're getting that information can also be detrimental or supportive to make sure you make really good choices. And I like, to say that Google isn't your attorney. So why do you think so many parents walk into divorce completely uninformed?
Well, I think for a lot of times, I mean, when you think about this is uncharted territory, nobody wants to be in this arena.
Yeah.
When people are getting married, no one's thinking about how and or if this might end. And so
Yeah.
when it is ending, when that relationship is ending, what I often tell people, or you'll hear that death and divorce are two of the most terrific or horrific and or traumatic things that somebody would go through. And I do think that divorce, in many ways, can be a much more primal experience. It's a primal rejection of a relationship. And so people are processing it in such a different way than they do death. And so because of that, they're firing on all these cylinders that have never been fired before. They are in a sense of panic, maybe because of their perceived misconceptions or what they believe to be true or not true. And I can talk both ways, right? There's men and fathers who have this preconceived notion of what is or is not going to happen, and there are mothers that have this preconceived notion of what is or isn't going to happen. And then they go to their friends and family, and everyone has an opinion. Their brother's cousin's divorce or their roommate's divorce, and they get all these facts mixed up, and they don't comprehend that every divorce is different. Every family is different. The facts of every case are different. And while they may touch general ideas, the specifics matter. And so they come in with this misconception or misinformation, and that has planted these beliefs. It's planted these suppositions in them. And then if they've gone to the internet and typed in, right, ChatGPT AI is only as smart as the person putting the prompt in there. And so depending on what prompt you've put in there is going to really dictate what comes back at you. And it's very easy nowadays for me to recognize when a potential client comes in and they've spoken with AI before they've come to see me, because the questions they ask, the statements they'll make are it's almost as if they're holding a sign up that says it. And it's very, very common, and it oftentimes they're starting in such a different position that I have to spend a lot of energy getting them back to understanding we're not even at the right starting point, because your misconceptions or what you think is going to happen or what you believe is going to happen, they may be 180 degrees from the truth. And so helping them reprogram that can be very difficult at times.
Yeah, and a little bit of the bias there. You mentioned the prompts. If you're putting in a bias-leaning prompt, then you might get a bias-leaning response. And I always say good old-fashioned Google, because now it seems so like every day. We used to kind of say that about the yellow pages, or when people would say, how'd you find me, right? Oh, the yellow pages, or the phone book, or word of mouth, of course. We're an advertisement in the newspaper.
Right.
But now Google's kind of been around, I'm going to say, is it 20 years, maybe a little
Longer
longer?
than that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it sort of rewards outrage and certainty, not nuance. It's sort of like the drama of it all. And TikTok legal advice is creating unrealistic expectations normally, I find. Man, I don't mean to pick on TikTok, but could be Facebook, could be Instagram, whatever the platform you're listening or reading.
Those
Can
are content providers, right? They need content.
exact right.
And calm, we negotiated our divorce within 60 days and everyone's happy and we're 50-50. That's not good content. That you're not right.
It's boring, right?
Exactly. I mean, uh, what's the, I'm spacing on it, but the National Enquirer, right? Like those types
Oh, remember that? Yeah.
right, those types of magazines, those types of TV shows, like they are driven by inflammatory content. And so those are the stories that are going to hit Google. Those are the stories that are going to get all over the place and start dragging people into it. These stories of people reaching settlement and co-parenting together in a peaceful way, that's not content you're going to find very easily.
Yeah. No, could you imagine if the National Enquirer, I don't even know if that magazine exists
I don't
anymore.
either, actually.
If you're under 40, you probably don't even know what that is. But it's like a gossip newspaper. And it used to be at the grocery store. And could you imagine if the headline was, Brad and Angelina are happily married, live, wonderfully, and the kids are all normal and stable? I mean,
They go out of
it would
business.
be boring. Who would buy that,
Right.
Yeah, it is tricky. So, do your research, everyone. There's nothing wrong with doing your research, but, make sure that you take it with a grain of salt and organize it and use it as a foundation or a springboard in which to really gather facts so you're not maybe adding to the drama that shouldn't be there. Divorce is one of those few life events where people spend more time researching vacations than custody laws. So be real careful with the time you put into this. Like I always felt that my divorce was like my job. Not that I wanted it to be, but it soon became clear, like, this is a full-time job. And that's some of the work I do as a certified divorce coach, is helping people really understand the scope of it. Like, it isn't just get the right lawyer and know what the attorney is giving you for good, solid counsel, right? But there's all the other pieces of it. And social media isn't always your best friend in divorce, too. A big percentage of evidence comes from it. So be very careful about that. So I think that's important. I can't harp on it enough, but
I'd piggyback on that and say that, specifics matter insofar as, like, I'm a licensed attorney in Texas, but I practice in Travis, Williamson, and Hayes County. That's it. And I know very much about those judges and how those counties operate.
Sure.
I don't know so much about El Paso County, right? And I can tell you about Texas law, but how the law is applied in your specific county and or judge matters even greater. So what you found on the internet might be relevant to Texas law, but how that's applied in your county really matters too.
Yes, and Texas being our largest state, you have to be careful with that, right?
That's right. You can travel 8 hours in one direction and still be in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Rhode Island, we could be a little bit more succinct, but there's a lot to consider. And I have to have a large Rolodex. I know that's not something we have anymore either, but now that we're talking about the National Enquirer, of professionals that I have to be able to refer my clients to, because when they come to me, I have to, okay, where do you live? What county do you live in? How long have you been married? Are there minor children? Do you own a business together? Is there conflict, et cetera, et cetera? And getting those right professionals for them in their exact location is really key to their success.
100%. I agree.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this argument mindset, this feeling of like arguing, fighting, combating, arm wrestling, tug of war is what I call it, which is kind of stage 3 of grieving too, of once they get over the shock and denial and anger and they're like, they feel almost like this war, but how, having to diffuse that a little bit. Let's talk about you're not fighting your exit. What's the right mindset they need to get into right away?
Well, I have little isms and lots of phrases, but one of them that I say is that agreements are cheap, easy, and fast, right? And so the more we agree, the faster it goes and the cheaper it is. But I can't make anyone agree to anything. Neither can the other attorney. A mediator can't make anybody agree to anything. And so what I say is agreements are cheap, easy, and fast, but fighting is not. And fighting is when someone says no. And it can be as simple as, I can come up with lots of little minute, there's nothing too small that we can't fight about. And I have lots of examples of ridiculous stories of people fighting over things. But, excuse me. But when it comes to your children or other things of this nature, having a realistic and honest understanding of where you are when you're coming into it, I think matters. I think that one of the things I do is I'm very direct with my clients. I don't feel like it really benefits them or me to tell them what they want to hear just for the sake of getting their money. I mean, there's lots of attorneys, and I'm not begrudging anyone's practice, but I can say a lot of things to people when they come into me because I know it's going to make them feel good. I'm going to get their money, and we're going to run up and spend a lot of money, and I know what the outcome is going to be. And I don't find that to be a really good way to practice law. I'd rather tell them up front, here are your obstacles, here are your challenges, here's where you sit, and here's a plan, but understand that if you're going to go fight about this, you're going to do it with your eyes wide open, right? I mean, one of the things that you said about as far as fighting, there's a phrase, I don't remember who coined it, but right fighting, right? You can go fight about being right, or we can take a position of what's best for your children or your family. And you being right may not be what's best for the overall outcome of your case, you as an individual, your children. There, we say principle fights, right? You're going to fight about the principle. It's the principle about something. I can't tell you how many times I hear clients say that. And I'm all about a good principle fight. I'm the type of person as a consumer, I will pay more at a business or something if I'm treated better, right? I mean, I'll walk out of a store, I'll leave things out if someone treats me poorly over the principle of it, right? Well, what I tell my clients is the only family who benefits from a principle fight is mine. And that the lawyers are the ones going to benefit from a principle fight. But most of the time when I tell a client that, their eyes wide open and they reevaluate what we're fighting about. Because if it's important and we're going to go fight about it, let's go fight about it. But if it's not, then let's have that conversation too. Because what I think people get mixed up in this idea of it's not about winning. There's no winning. Like, it is degrees of losing. And what I say as far as, I'll give an example. In Texas, we don't have a presumption that it's a 50-50 possession schedule. And what I mean, we don't use the word visitation. We don't use the word custody. The word we use for where the children will spend each night is possession. So a parent has a possession schedule. And that might seem aggressive to some people, but I like it. We made these things. We get to possess these things. And so what happens is the Texas law presumes that one parent, it's best for the children that one parent have what we call a standard possession schedule, which is, for just brevity's sake, it's every other weekend and one night during the week, things like that. It's not a 50-50 schedule. And people don't understand that. And people come into my office and they say, well, I'm an equal parent. I'm a good parent. I work, I provide, and that's great. And no one's devaluing that. But our judges are going to try their best to maintain the status quo of what the children know. And most marriages, most of them coming in, have a division of labor where one parent is carrying at least 51% of the parenting water over the other. And that's not because they sat down and decided that. They didn't say, okay, you're going to work 8 to 5, or you're going to work 10-hour days and provide for us, and I'm going to. But that's just how it naturally evolved. Mm-hmm. And when I tell parents this and understand, well, when was the last time you took them to a doctor's appointment? And they say, well, I can't. I work. Well, I understand that. No one's going to begrudge you for that.
Yeah.
But this parent is the one who does that. Who goes to parent-teacher conferences? My schedule won't allow that. I understand. But that's what the judges see too, right? And so who gets them up in the morning? Who makes them breakfast? Who makes sure their homework is done before the other parent gets home, right? These things matter not in a you're good and you're bad. They matter in what is the baseline existence that the children know. Mm-hmm. And our judges are going to try to keep that together as much. They're not going to just blow the whole thing up because it's the parent's best, right? They're not focused on what the parents want. And so I have that hard conversation with parents a lot. That doesn't mean you can't go fight about it. Doesn't mean you can't go into court and make your argument, do all these things. But I want you to understand that's going to cost a lot of money. Mm-hmm. It is going to be very difficult, and it's not going to be pleasant. And at the end of it, regardless of the outcome, you're still going to be co-parents with this person. And it may be difficult to do that. So I don't know. I just find I have these direct conversations to help them understand. Without information, they can't make a decision. So I try to give them as much information as they can to help make that decision.
Well, that's very interesting to hear because I'm seeing that less and less in other states. Uh, I don't know, but I'm seeing more mindset where it is assumed. Again, this is just an observation that it is assumed that both parents are now working and both parents contribute equally, and they are going to actually share 50-50 legal and 50-50 physical. Not always, but I see more and more mindset of that. So, whether there's 28 days on the calendar, 14 for A, 14 for B, is it disruptive to kids? It can be, depending on where they live, school, sports, friends, extracurricular activities, et cetera, et cetera. That's really the beautiful part about private mediation is you're not relying on what the court tells you or orders you to do. The two of you can do what's in the best interest of your family based on the nuances of Schedule A and Schedule B of parents, and depending on how many kids you have, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's a lot of kids, but it is unique. So that's good to know that Texas does have that kind of mindset of the primary. I know that isn't the word they use, but the status quo schedule versus more of that shared schedule. And
Well,
it's
let me just. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
case, right, or judge by judge, and judges have that title judge for a reason. They have to judge the situation.
When in Texas, we elect our judges, and
Yep, you mentioned
um,
that.
you do not have to have 1 ounce of family law experience to get elected judge and be handling family law cases in Texas, which should be terrifying for anyone. If you're wanting to take your family to court and have it decided by someone who never practiced family law, that should be terrifying. But we have judges that have declared. I mean, we know in this courtroom you will not get a 50-50 schedule. They do not agree with it. They don't believe it's, etc. I also want to touch on something you mentioned, that
Okay.
the idea that both parents might be working isn't necessarily what I was talking about. As far as both parents, absolutely, most of my clients, both parents are working, but one parent is still pulling more parental water than the other. When I say to them, right, who goes to the doctor's appointments, there's a phrase called the default parent. I don't know if you've heard that, right? And so, it doesn't matter who's working, because when I ask that client, well, who goes to the doctor's appointment, and they say, well, I can't, I work. Oh, so your spouse doesn't work? No, she or he does. Interesting, right? A judge is definitely going to weigh that. So this spouse who also works takes off work to go to the doctor, but this spouse can't, right? That matters. Those things are truisms. You said that parents need to kind of work together to what's the best interest of their kids. I think that phrase, I mean, that's the phrase in Texas. That's the guiding statutory principle in probably most states. But
Right.
I think I would argue that almost every case, both sides think that they're operating in the best interest of their kid. Like, that's the crux of what we do is this parent A believes what they're doing and saying is in their child's best interest. Parent B also thinks it. It's just that we disagree on what that phrase means.
Sure, it's a definition, and that's the hard part of that phrase is what does that define to you? How does that define
Exactly.
to you? Right, yeah. Yeah, it's just tricky, because I'm seeing more and more people all across the country, not Texas or any state, where they are both working and they do both take the kids to the dentist and the doctor and the soccer and the ballet, and they are both very involved in the children's lives. So that's really it's very easy when you've got somebody that's traveling a lot Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, kind of not an involved parent, and the others to stay at home and they do that traditional June Cleaver, background. But that model is seen less and less. I do see more parents really divvying it up, almost sitting at the table saying, okay, here's the schedule. I'm doing this, you're doing that. See it, it is a new world, and that it does lead to more room for conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a tricky part, you don't necessarily win custody. I hate that phrase,
That's correct.
yeah, it's tough. You could win emotion and still lose your peace. So you have to be very careful with that phrase. It's difficult. It also depends a lot on the ages of the children. If you've got a 2-year-old versus a 15-year-old, you'd probably be having a very different conversation. And as they get older, they tend to have an opinion of, not picking parents or choosing, but they'll, of course, I always say, pin one parent against the other. I mean, I was a teenager. Who didn't do that? And my parents weren't divorced, so they lived in the same house. It's a little bit easier to get away with things when mom and dad live in separate homes, separate addresses. You can kind of use one. Well, mom said. Well, dad said. It's different. Whereas 2-year-olds, or I don't.
I can
mean
move
to,
a 2-year-old. I can pick up a 2-year-old.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
easy. Yeah.
That's why I have a small dog too. It's a different conversation with a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old versus once they hit school and they have friends and how long is the commute. So that's really the important part, is to create a really good mindset going into this ahead of time about how you can work with your co-parent and not sliding into that parallel parenting or counter parenting model. And it's not easy. And one of the reasons I'm so busy with coaching is to keep those parents from throwing gasoline on the fire, because it's really easy to throw gas on the fire when you're already upset.
I'll tell you one thing a misconception, at least here in Texas, where we have a statute that says when a child turns 12, they have the ability to speak with the judge about their preference. They don't decide anything, and that's a very common misconception. People come into my office all the time and they say, well, I heard or I read, right, or the internet told me that when my child turns 12 that she gets to decide where she lives. We don't let children decide adult matters in Texas at all. But that thought, that mindset, that misconception that people get from either their friends or the internet or whatever, I see so many different ways that is weaponized, right? You can see one parent lean on a child or
Manipulate.
really, manipulate, right? With either no discipline, right? One parent is the fun parent, and suddenly now this child wants to live primarily with this parent all of a sudden, right?
Sure. Because there's no curfew, and they get to stay up till midnight and eat Oreos for breakfast.
That's right. They can fail school and not get punished. All these things, right? Judges, I think, for the most part, are sophisticated enough to know this, and they're not in. We're not cross-examining a 12-year-old. They're going to meet with the judge in chambers. The judges take that very seriously here, and they're really having a conversation. I think that more often than not, they get to the heart of what's happening, of why a 13-year-old is suddenly wanting to live primarily with one parent over the other, and but that is a common thing that we see weaponized. It was a common thing that it's a misconception. Parents think that suddenly my 13-year-old wants to decide to live. Well, that's not how it works at all. And I've seen judges. I've had a 15-year-old boy who wanted to live primarily with his dad, running away. Like, there were lots of reasons why we thought that would be a good. The judge didn't let him. The judge said, no, you're going to live primarily with his mom, and that was devastating for everybody. But at the end of the day, the judge felt like that was what was best for that child. That 15-year-old didn't get to decide where he lived.
So you're saying that in Texas there are 0 cases where it's 50-50?
No. There's lots of cases where it's 50-50.
Okay.
But the presumption in Texas, the legal presumption is that it's a standard possession. If you can overcome that, you can rebut that presumption. But there are many judges in Central Texas. There's a handful that have made it very clear they follow the presumption. Now,
Sure.
if you come to them, right, if you have a mediated settlement agreement, or you've mediated your agreement and you signed it, that document is binding, they're going to approve that, right? We've agreed to have a 50-50 possession schedule.
Right.
They aren't going to overturn. In fact, that their ability to overturn that is pretty small. So, but if you're going to court asking for a 50-50 schedule, I would say, because our presumption is this, a lot of judges take the position that if you're coming to me, you're in court, you're litigating this. By definition, your ability to parent 50-50 is probably not great, right? If y'all could have agreed, you wouldn't be in this courtroom litigating a 50-50 schedule. And so that becomes a hill that you have to overcome. And maybe you can show why we've had to take this route, right? Some people weaponize the standard possession schedule here. So there's lots of back and forth, but there's lots of parents that have 50-50 in Texas. We have lots of different types that we use, but nothing in our family code enumerates a 50-50 schedule.
Good to know. Thanks for sharing. That's a really good insight, Jason. The misconceptions about parenting plans or possessions. I know teenagers probably do not want to hear that they are a possession.
Right. They do
Yeah,
not.
don't drop that word around your kids, right?
Exactly.
That's sort of the court word, but the attorney word. Whether that schedule looks like, that it is a highly unique situation, and I'm also seeing a lot of more special needs incidents too, where
Oh, yeah.
it's an educational type of thing, or individual educational plans, behavioral issues. Never mind, just logistics of getting from house A to house B and job A to job B, or parents sometimes having, their own struggles. But it is important to slow down and take that into consideration. So,
The special needs aspect just adds gas to an already flaming fire. I mean, like,
yeah.
and that can be such a specialized deal. There are so many variables to that. It can be much more encumbersome.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the mistakes you see, because I'm sure you might sometimes want to, forgive the expression, pull the hair out of your head, right? About, thing like, oh no, why didn't you find me 6 months ago, a year ago, yesterday, 3 minutes ago? Those mistakes that you make. What are those common mistakes that you see people make before they, or during the process? What do you see on a common, habit, or should we say replay?
Well, I'd say 2 to 3 biggest, right? Posting stuff on the internet, don't do that. The internet, I don't care if it's your Facebook page, it's not a private page. It is a public forum, and people put stuff on. I'm fascinated to what people put on the internet when it
Yeah.
comes to their family and their personal fight and the personal details. That's a big one. Another big one is, a phrase I use, kind of like word vomiting text messages or email, when you just this huge diatribe, and then what I try to tell clients is, just because someone wrote it in a text message doesn't make it true, or an email doesn't make it true. But
Right.
human nature is, this whole big thing about you did this. Remember 2 years ago when you did X, Y, Z? You want to defend yourself. So then you respond with this big, and now we've got this just horrific text exchange that judges roll their eyes over. It is never good. There's no winning on that at all. But that's a huge, misconception, or not misconception. That's a mistake. I tell people, stop immediately. Stop. And it doesn't matter what they say. If they're not asking you a direct question about your child, you don't respond at all, and that's hard. That's human nature is human nature. The other one, in probably close third, or combined with the rest of them, with our phones now, people like to just videotape everything, and they'll have videotape of arguments, and they'll have videotape, and people come to me all the time and I have video of him, screaming at me, or I have video of her screaming at me and calling me all these nasty names with the kids there. I'm like, oh, well, let me see that. And the phone is hidden, or it's, the person recording knows they're recording, but the other person doesn't. And so look how calm I am. Look how I come. Like, well, yeah, because you knew you were being recorded. It's like, people don't realize sometimes the opposite of what they're trying to show in that video is what comes out. And I have to tell them, like, this is a terrible video. And they're like, I know, right? Look how terrible he is. Like, no. This is a terrible video for you. You come off horrible in this because you're letting him scream and throw stuff, and the child's right there, but you're calmly recording this for
Right.
trial or to
Right.
build a case. No, that's no good at all. But people are often shocked when I tell them that. But I'm like, this video that you have here is going to play badly for you in court.
Yeah, you see that a lot on social media, where somebody, records somebody being beaten up and they don't do anything to stop it, Like, I know
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with family court, but it's like, well, why did you watch it?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it is tricky. Yeah. I know. I many years ago wrote a little. I did a lot of still do some public speaking about all this, and the top 12 worst divorce mistakes. And I can't tell you how much I'm nodding. With the social media, I think it's 85% of divorce evidence comes from social media or texting or
Text, yeah.
that should we say electronic stuff. I don't know if that number is exactly valid, Jason, but it's a pretty high
It's
number.
pretty high up there. Yeah.
I'm not going to discredit it. I do see a lot of them. They come to my office and like, oh, what should I do? I'm so confused. And because of course people come to me early, and sometimes their spouse doesn't even know that they're upset, contemplating, or on the other end they're filing and they want to change the custody. They're filing a motion, or they're trying to change things that maybe didn't go so well. So people are in all different stages, but it usually does come down to them not necessarily behaving themselves and saying things that aren't great. You mentioned that. I call it the yardstick.
Oh, yeah.
The text message that is basically, goes on forever, emotional vomiting, where they just argue and argue with themselves. And like you said, just because it's out there doesn't mean it's true. And be careful what you wish for. It comes back to bite you. It's such an easy shall we say, dopamine hit, right? Where they go, I want that instant gratification right now from you. And if I'm not going to get it voluntarily, I'm going to force you to give it to me. It feels this, it's very, like you said, it's not easy, but you can do it. So, yeah.
They're not thinking about when that text message is going to be plastered up on the big screen in a courtroom and we're all slowly reading
it. The jury watching in Texas, yeah.
Yeah. They're not thinking about that and how horrific that is. And how they come across. They're not thinking, because they're in that moment. They're in that rage moment. They're in that fair cycle, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it is hard. That one of the things I feel like we do, it's a service we, as an attorney, is to try to help people navigate that by trying to remove yourself from that. Like why you hired an attorney. Let us handle the communication. Let us tell you, guide you. But not everyone, people pay a lot of money for attorneys. They don't always listen to our advice. That's all I can do is kind of give you the plays and if this, then that. And they don't always choose that. They want to go in a different direction. And then we'll untie that knot if you tie it and we'll deal with that.
Yes. And two others that we didn't touch on. One is about the children where they feel like they are the tug of war, kind of weaponizing them and using the children to harm the other parent. And the other one is when, and that of course can happen to different degrees, and the other one is when they just stonewall and they refuse to engage in mediation. They're like, nope, I'm just, it'll fail, it's not worth it, I'm not going to do that. And maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but there's a bit of stubbornness, shall we say. Resentment and stubbornness can play a big role in not moving forward.
Yeah, mediation is a process. I tell people it's an all-day affair. Even if we feel like it shouldn't be, it is. It's long. It's tiring. It's all the things. But at least here, right? It's the only opportunity where you have a say in what happens to your family. If you want to have, whether you think your spouse is going to agree or not, do you want to have a voice in what happens? Mediation's the only, or settlement, mediation is the only place that's going to happen. You don't want to have a voice. You want to go let some stranger who got elected judge 6 months ago decide what happens to your family. I guess that's an option, but that, I don't know, that to me sounds petrifying. That should be terrifying to anybody. And so I have that conversation every time with clients. And here where we are in Central Texas, for the most part, we are almost always required to try and mediate before we have a trial. That's not a blanket rule, but it's kind of the guiding principle we use here.
Yeah, I'm finding that more and more universal, regardless of what state I'm working with clients across the U.S. and beyond. It is more common than not. I can count on one hand the amount of couples that say, oh no, we didn't mediate, we went right to trial. So yeah, in my case, we tried mediation and then went to litigation, but it isn't always that way. Sometimes people, litigate and then throw the mediation in during that, process, that timeline. So it's different, but I do see that mistake where there's, I would say, a little bit of a stubbornness.
I
I
think
would
that
say,
I call that, I don't call it a pre-litigation mediation. But,
right,
it's not all, at least in my experience. And litigation just means we have a lawsuit. It doesn't
sure.
necessarily mean you've had a hearing. Doesn't mean that you've been in a courtroom. But I have found that you need to have a little more skin in the game. Jumping to mediation before you've done discovery or you've done any, it doesn't. It rarely produces a settlement until we've gotten down the path a little bit. My experience has been because people need to feel a little bit of this process and feel how ugly it is and feel like this is not okay. I don't want to keep going or make it worse or go have a hearing or go in front of a judge. Let's get reasonable. That's
Yeah.
where I found the most success with mediation versus jumping into it before we felt any of that.
Yeah, and a lot of that just depends on how complex their situation is too.
Absolutely.
If there isn't a lot of angst, things to argue over, and definitely if they don't have children.
Oh
If you
yeah, absolutely.
don't own property and you have no children and you've been married a few years, you know, spending a ton of money on plaintiff defendant lawsuit in court and discovery and interrogatories and hearings is,
Yeah.
well, usually silly. So, and I
Yeah.
also find, Jason, most people don't realize that marriage is a legal binding contract.
Yeah.
People see it as a dress and a tuxedo and a party and a cake and a little vacation called a honeymoon. And I know I'm romanticizing it, but it's really a lot different than that. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, if for whatever reason that marriage doesn't work, and I'm not pro-divorce,
Right. I
I'm,
say that
you
all
know,
the time, even though this is what I do for a
happy
living.
to
We're
say
not
I've
pro-divorce.
saved some marriages.
Yeah.
In fact, I did some discernment counseling for a couple last night. So it is, it's hopeful. But on the other hand, if it doesn't work out, the only way to sever or untie that tangled ball of yarn is to enter into yet another legal binding contract known as divorce. And people don't like, wait, I was like, and once somebody files, it's a lawsuit. You're
That's right.
suing your partner. And that a lot of them look at me like I have 9 heads.
Hmm.
Like, really? Like, I'm like, really? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
That's right.
it's a lawsuit. Yeah. And this isn't like, a day at the beach. Like, oh, I'm just going to get a lawyer. And you're like, oh. And I don't want to scare people, but, that when you get married, you put that little ring on their finger, I do, and you get the license. Why do you think it's called a marriage license,
That's right.
right? So,
Yep.
but
That's right.
you have to admit, a lot of people don't see it that way,
Oh
until
no.
it
No.
happens, right?
Well,
Yeah.
in Texas, we're a community property state, which means,
Okay.
people think that means whatever we have is 50-50. That you don't need a lawyer to divide by two. What that means for us is, as a community property state, is once you got married, you created a community estate, and everything that was acquired during the marriage is now part of the community. And what that means is that's 100% each. So my wife and I, everything we own is 100% mine and 100% hers. It's not 50-50 either of ours. And so how do we untangle something that is 100% mine and 100% hers? There's nuance to that, and there's all kinds of things, and people don't think about that. People just think everything's divide by two. It's certainly not divide by two. It can be. Agreements are cheap, easy, and fast, but understanding what is how you get to an agreement.
Yeah, so break that down for people that are curious that maybe don't understand the difference between a community property state and an equitable division state, and how that 100% doesn't equate to 50-50, or it may not.
Yeah, so in Texas, right, we're a community property state, which means everything that was acquired during the marriage is community property. So anything that was owned before marriage, anything that was inherited during the marriage, or anything that was gifted during the marriage. And a gift can be from a spouse to a spouse, can be carved out, and we don't divide separate property in Texas. And so there's a huge burden of proof, very, very tough burden of proof to prove something is your separate property. But what happens is we take all the community debts, all the community assets, and we put them on a big spreadsheet. And it's the bottom number, it's the net value of your community estate. And in Texas, you're entitled to what's called a just and right division. And I tell people that's a legal term of art that doesn't mean anything, right? That's what judges decide if it's just and right. We typically take that to mean 50-50 of the bottom number. The net value of the community should be about a 50-50 split. but that might mean you're taking 85% of the 401k, and he's taking the house, which has $300,000 worth of equity. So now that means you've got to take all these other assets to make that bottom number equalize, right? Instead of just dividing every asset by two. And so there's where nuance comes in as far as, what is the value of something now? I have RSUs, and I have some that invested now, some that vest 3 years from now, but I earned them during the marriage. All of these calculations come into play, and that's what we do, is help people understand the net amount of their community estate, and then what is a just and right division. If the biggest asset most people have is their house, and so if somebody is taking the house, oftentimes that puts a huge asset on their column, which has to be equalized with other assets and
Other
liabilities.
assets. Unless you don't have other assets and you got to sell that house.
And then we're selling that house. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing for people to hear.
Yeah, some people don't like me when I say you're married to the sheetrock.
That's right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's that, domestic relations financial affidavit or marital balance sheet or whatever everybody wants to call it, and coming up with that divisional, untangling the knots. And a lot of that has to do with tax ramifications and quadros and, how liquid assets are, and, all those things come into play too. So it's important, yeah. So I hope everyone has gained a little bit more insight in this and why it's essential to have the right attorney represent you, particularly if you are considering going to trial. And in some states, well, you're probably going to trial. So feel free to reach out to Jason naturally if you live in the Austin area. And what's the best way for people to reach out to you, learn more about you, and perhaps talk to you about their situation?
Yeah, the best way is, my website has all my contact information. It's, jasonwrightlaw.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can send us messages there. I have both personal and a business website. But we have our numbers, our contact, reaching out to us, set up a meeting and a consultation for us to go through your facts and really help you understand where you are and what to do.
Yeah. Very important to put them in your Rolodex, so do that. And Jason, I think what's so powerful about this conversation is that it replaces a lot of panic with some perception and perspective, because divorce doesn't have to be the emotional warfare that families tend to think it is. I know firsthand, I work with people every day and help them understand that divorce can be done smoother, better, wiser. So thank you for this. And if you need help with your situation and you need to speak to me, you know how to find me. Paulette.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It was an honor. Paulette at BetterDivorceAcademy.com. And until next time, everyone, I would tell you to make it the best divorce, but you make it a better one. See you soon. It doesn't want to end. There we go.